Okay, welcome everybody. This is Alex and Reza, and we are super excited to have our friend Gautam, Dr. G. Gulati here. He is like a social media, not only social media, but on the speaking circuit guru. He is everywhere, and he's built some amazing companies. So, Gautam, we're super excited to have you here today.
I'm excited to be on. This is going to be a great conversation. Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
me.
So why don't you start us off with just like a brief introduction of kind of who you are and what you're doing now, and then we'll go back to your origin story.
Yeah, so as you said, I'm Dr. G is the simplest way to refer to me, Dr. Gulati. I'm an internal medicine doctor, but I went off the beaten path a number of years ago. I also have a business background, public health background, and what a lot of people just don't know, I also have an interior design background, which I'm sure we'll circle back to in terms of how that came into play. Currently, in my current role, I'm the founder and CEO of a company called The Well Home. It's actually my own company that I founded out of a series of personal experiences over a number of years, and I'm sure we can sort of dig into that in terms of how that came about. But the Well Home essentially provides bespoke luxury designs for people looking to optimize their health and longevity in their home. We also do work outside of the home as well in terms of hospitality and retail and some of the other settings as well, but really looking at the intersection of health and real estate. I like to say that we're one of the only companies that plays at the intersection of atoms, bits, and cells, right? ABCs. Atoms being your physical space, bits being technology and programming, and cells being your health and biology.
That's really amazing.
Yeah, you don't hear a lot of, like, you hear intersection of business and medicine and pharma, and I even have a fine arts degree from back in the day, but interior design is amazing because it really impacts everything we do on a daily basis, the spaces that we live in. So take us back to the beginning. Take us back to, let's say, either medical school or residency. You're becoming an internal medicine doc, and then what was kind of the first foray into doing something else?
It's so funny. So I just recently turned 50. And I think that's sort of the age where you start looking back and trying to sort of make sense of how all the dots connect. And you know how, like, Steve Jobs said in his commencement speech that you can only connect the dots looking backwards. And sort of the best way to sort of frame what I'm about to share with you in terms of my journey is at the core of everything, the thread looking back is all I am is I'm a storyteller and a story changer, right? If you look at the world of healthcare, regardless of what you do in that world, we're in the business of changing people's lives. Right? So whatever narrative that they have today, we're trying to make it better tomorrow, right? And the tools that we have at our disposal are different, right? So early in my career, my tools were different. I was in management consulting. I did some, financial assistant work. I was in advertising. Then I went into innovation, building products. Earlier in the days, as you said, in residency, I was treating patients directly. So pills and medications were my tool. Now I use design, but that seems to be the common thread. So at the core of everything for me, I really enjoyed sort of thinking about the human behavior experience. And so looking back, if you look back in my college days, I used to promote parties and throw parties at clubs and be a promoter and DJ. And so for me, like, I look back, I'm like, how does that all connect? How does that make sense? And I just loved being able to transform people's lives, right? When we threw those parties, it was a way to basically see people happy. It brought joy. And so now I get that same type of high when I speak on stage, and you see that same type of transformation in somebody's experience, just in a different way, that I do it now that I did back then. And so I've just been using different tools in my toolbox over the course of the past 3 decades to change people's lives, change people's story. And how I've done that has essentially evolved over the course of time.
But how do you decide, like, which tools to use and how to, like, sharpen these tools, right? So, like, when you're first getting started, or you had all sorts of other things before maybe medicine, right? How do you decide, like, okay, the next chapter, or in this project, or in this kind of setting, beyond my medical knowledge, we need to, sharpen our skills to inspire people. We need to sharpen our skills to be able to communicate or change behavior, or something, right? Because everybody would love to be on stage and do what you do, but it's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah, you have to sort of work, a lot of things happen accidentally. You just have to sort of keep an open mindset. I like to say, follow your curiosity. People oftentimes say, find your passion. I'm very anti finding your passion. I think that's bad advice. I think people should follow their curiosity. And in following their curiosity, they will uncover what they're passionate about. And then when you find something that you really love, really double down on that and start pursuing that. And so in sort of, if you look at my life as sort of a book, I don't think there's an ending to the book. I think I take it one chapter at a time. I think the story unfolds in terms of how we piece together that specific chapter. And then the next chapter, I don't know until we get to the end of the first chapter, the second chapter. And so it's really just one experience after another. So there's no real set plan. There's no set goal. There was no way of me saying that I ultimately wanted to be a professional speaker and hit the big stage. Like, I had no idea. In fact, I was really afraid of public speaking. But when you start to look backwards again, so I got my first experience in public speaking when my class selected me to give the graduation speech, when I graduated high school. And that was sort of my first sort of high and experience of getting in front of a crowd. And, I've always been a little bit of a black sheep and doing things unconventionally. And even at that time at the school, it was recorded on live television. And because I was representing my class, I wasn't the valedictorian, but it was sort of the class representative. They wanted me to represent the class in giving a speech. And so there are certain things that the head of the school probably didn't agree with and didn't want me to talk about. And so what I ended up doing is I wrote two different speeches. One that I had approved by the head of school and the staff of the school, and the other one that I actually gave. And you could see their blank looks on their face when I gave that speech. But I share that story because that essentially is how I've defined my life. Like, I don't do things conventionally. Like, if somebody is zigging, I'm going to zag, right? There's a great book by Peter Thiel called 0 to 1, which is probably one of my favorite books. And it's oftentimes talked about in the context of entrepreneurship. But I talk about it in the context of how to define yourself, how to become something unique. And I think what this concept is like, you need to sort of create your own little secret sauce, that makes you unique. Like, what's your competitive advantage? And so, sorry, going off tangent there a little bit, but going back to the story of speaking, that really set the stage in terms of me getting, that high of, being in party mode, right? Changing people, seeing people's emotions and changing people's lives on stage. But I didn't get to revisit that until after medical school. I got invited to give a talk at TEDx Mid-Atlantic. And that was sort of an accidental play. And in doing so, it really just sort of spawned this whole career in being able to give talks. And so in running companies and doing things unconventionally, I didn't realize that people found what I had to say is interesting and of value. And so when we sold, and we can probably get into this later, we sold a company in 2013 to Merck. And apparently the way I had built the innovation division for that company, I was the chief innovation and chief medical officer. That same year after selling the company, I was invited 40 times to come speak about my innovation practices. And sort of that was accidentally then rolled into a speaking career. And I was like, wow, people are willing to pay for what I have to say. And then it just became fun because you get to meet the most interesting people. You travel to the most interesting places. You get to learn on the job. It's like the best ROI. But it was a slow build. It was like one of those, 10 to 15 year overnight successes in terms of professional speaking.
I love this idea of that there's this approved script that we have in life, and then there's what we actually have, we take the risk on and do that's different. And I think that's what's hard for a lot of physicians, right? The approved script is, put your head down, just take it, just work clinically and don't do anything else. And folks need to hear these sort of inspirational stories. So tell us a little bit about like the interior design. How did you get into that? What was your first foray into all that?
Well, let me come to that in a second, because I want to touch on this whole thing about this approved script, because for things seem rosy now, but for a large portion of my career, things were actually really rough. And I think people need to recognize that sometimes we see the rosiness and we like to publicize and share all the great things that happen at the end. But for many people that you see There's a lot of obstacles and challenges in the way. It's like, Titanos in terms of pushing up the boulder, along the mountain. And that was the same for me, right? So I always thought that there was a written script. And I think a lot of physicians and a lot of healthcare providers feel the same way. There's a certain set of expectations that you have to meet, and you don't want to disappoint anyone in the process. And that's extremely stifling. It's extremely stifling. And to be honest, I probably spent the good 12 to 15 years of my career trapped in that mindset, thinking I had to act and do things a certain way just to meet other people's expectations. And that might be my med school colleague peers, it might be my resident peers, it might be my parents. And I felt that if I strayed from that, I was going to disappoint. But here's the real hard truth and reality. People aren't focused on you as much as you think they are, right? We tend to be scared, like fearful. What are they going to think of me? The reality is they're so focused on themselves, they could care less. They don't give a shit about what you're doing, right? So that should just remove the burden and that's on our shoulders in thinking that if we do things a different way, that people are going to have some sort of judgment on us. And that couldn't be further from the truth. And once you sort of let that go, your opportunities really open up, because then you start really pursuing the things that you're curious about, the things that you're passionate about. And that was, to some degree for me, what opened up the doors for me to explore my curiosity. And interior design, of course, was one of those. I've always had, before becoming a doctor, I've always wanted to be an architect. And again, I didn't know why until now. I look back and I was like, I like changing people's experiences. And I think there's something about the physical space that really evokes a feeling, right? So I was actually a creative writing and English major. And so in writing poetry, I used to do a lot of spoken word. Maya Angelou was sort of a big inspiration for me. And she has that quote, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but that says, people won't remember, what you said, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. And there's something about our environment, like how you portray your voice in a speech, or how you design an environment, or how you throw a party, how you make somebody feel, to me was an unexplored path. And so I went down this line of trying to explore how do we use design to make health our default behavior. And of course, our physical spaces was overlooked. And so anytime I try to immerse myself in a subject, I think what people don't realize, you don't necessarily need, 100 different degrees. You need the right information from the right source with the right people. And there's so much out there. I think like ClinX Academy, there's other sources as well, but just go find the information you want, learn what you can, and you're sort of well on your way. And that's kind of what I did.
I like this idea of how you make people feel, beyond medicine and hopefully making people feel better. I think about this in the teams that we've had. Alex and I had the pleasure of working together for a year, and we had a very special team that cared for one another, would give the best for one another, travel across the country and spend 18 hours in a day working together. So this idea of the ripple that you have, whether it's through physical space or digital health or clinical innovation teams or whatever, it's core to what we believe in. And I think as people start thinking about what is it that I need to do to get to the next step, part of it is kind of the what and the how, but the other piece is who do I want to be in this room or on my team or to go on this journey with. Can you kind of comment on, over the years, like small teams, big teams, how you've kind of like learned from others that were your peers and kind of left something of yourself behind for others to be able to run with for years to come?
Yeah, you know what? I made every mistake in the book when it came to that. I think, as physicians, we all have big egos. We're sort of trained to think and give the, projection that we know we have the answer for everything, right? Because if we don't, we look weak. And so I think innately as physicians, it's really hard for us to ask for stuff. It's really hard for us to ask for help. But the most important and critical thing that I made every mistake of is I didn't seek guidance and mentorship early on, and I wish I did. And so it wasn't something until later on that I just started surrounding myself with other peers who were also experiencing the same thing. And you start to realize that really nobody knows anything. Everyone's kind of making it up as they go along. And it's really relieving. But the most critical thing, we tend, especially as physicians, to sort of be in analysis paralysis. Like we won't proceed unless we have the right answer. And if you're going to sort of explore areas outside of medicine, there's this important notion. I think we have a lot of nouns in our networks, but we need more verbs. We need people willing to take action and do more things. And that's where the learning happens, right? Now you can sit there and consume information and study all you want and do analysis paralysis, but the only people who make it forward and do anything substantial are the people who actually take action. And so I think that's sort of a misconception that as physicians and providers that we feel like we have to be in this world of perfection in order to move forward. And that's kind of our ego talking. So you have to sort of remove that piece of a mindset. And that requires you to be a little bit vulnerable with your network, with your circle, with your group, have these open conversations. And if they're not, find a different group because they are out there. And really, don't necessarily surround yourself with a comfortable tribe. Like I would seek out people who had different perspectives from my own, because that's what made my mind uncomfortable, right? It got me thinking in different ways. And then you can essentially create sort of this intersection thinking that allows you to generate some new ideas. But I think, in this world, there tends to be, people who are either consuming information, they're creating information, or they're just a voyeur. And if you're, we need all of them. We need people who are just sort of watching. We need people who are consuming. But I think if you're trying to make actual change, you have to sort of be a creator, and you have to basically think about how you're going to be contributing to society in a different way.
I'd love to understand a little bit more about your actual work in the interior design space. Is it like mostly in the geriatric space? And you said something about making health using design to make health the default behavior. Like, can you expand on that? I want to really understand.
Yeah, some interesting statistics, right? So some that won't be surprising, some that probably are, right? About 66% of our population is living with one or more chronic condition. Of that, about 45% are living with two or more. This whole concept of aging is actually something that's only existed in the past 3 to 4 decades, right? So, not 3 to 4 generations, not decades. It's something that polypathology is something that is something of a modern society challenge and issue, because 100 years ago, the average life expectancy was 38 years old. You died by getting stabbed or in war or in battle, or you had some sort of infection, right? Before the onset of hygiene and penicillin and antibiotics. Now, we're dying of things like heart disease and neurodegenerative disorders and cancers. And yet, it's the same stuff that would have happened many, many years ago. And then we've altered our environment. We spend over 90% of our time inside in an indoor environment. And of that, about 76% of that is spent inside of our homes. And so we've never looked at our environment as a vessel or a vehicle for health promotion or disease prevention. And it really came about, to your question, Alex, we do some work in the sick care system, which is those in treating and managing people who are living with chronic care conditions. And then we also work in the well care system, which are those who are trying to prevent disease in the first place. And we have services that really provide offerings on both of those sides. But the notion is we have a system that's rigged against us, right? I like to talk about 7 elements that we really focus on, which is the 7 levers of bioharmony. It's sleep, nutrition, movement, mindfulness, connection, purpose, and safety. And if you look at the common denominator across how do we impact health, those are the very simplistic categories that we need to address and we need to reset. But the system's rigged against us, right? We ask people to sleep better or get better sleep, yet we put them in these boxes with unnatural lighting and we put a big TV in front of them in their bedrooms, right? We ask people to move more, but then we stick them behind a computer, behind a desk in the sedentary lifestyle. We ask people to eat better, but we only offer them ultra processed foods and stock our pantries with sugary foods. We ask them to connect better, but then we give everybody this little phone device which prevents us from connecting with each other in a more holistic way, right? We ask people to breathe better and drink better water, but we have all these chemicals that are surrounding us in these homes. So it just didn't make sense to me. I'm like, we've actually manufactured and designed sickness into our life. And if that's the case, then we should be able to inversely design health into our lives. And that's the premise of what we're trying to do. And so in our research and uncovering this, we realized that there's no real research and evidence in terms of what are the things that we can do, both in terms of prevention of disease, but also management of disease. And so my father actually had Alzheimer's and dementia. And so the first seed of this concept started way back in 2012. I didn't realize how things would progress and it would turn into the well home. But that was when I first realized the impact that his environment and how he navigated inside of our homes actually impacted his outcomes, more so than any medication or any pill. Right? I oftentimes like to say that the greatest medicine that we can offer doesn't come from a bottle or a pill. It actually comes from your home. And so we had big questions like, when do we move him to the main floor? How do we reduce, sundowning and agitation symptoms that happen in the evening? How do we reduce his pill burden? How do we track him if he's at flight risk or at fall risk? And so we had all these questions, and we ended up determining and creating a 100-point checklist, 100 different things that you could do inside the home to optimize for somebody who just has dementia. And we were able to improve his quality of life, improve his daily functioning, improve his happiness, reduce his pills from 12 down to 3, all without any other intervention. It didn't matter what doctor he had or what system he went to. It was all within the constraints of our home. And that was really eye-opening, because then we started looking at people who are suffering from migraines, or people who are living with cancer or autoimmune conditions or gut issues, or people who had children with autism. And so we started to see that there were simple things that we could do inside of the home to help improve whatever condition that they're living with.
That's fantastic. We could possibly spend another hour diving into this, because both Alex and I are super curious about the content. But I guess if we zoom out a little bit around this idea of noticing a new opportunity, finding an undifferentiated lane, and then continuing to strive for excellence within your lane. Like, what advice do you have for other folks, who are, whether medical directors, early stage physicians? How do they differentiate themselves from everybody else without necessarily going and doing utilization management, one case at a time, et cetera, right? Like, what thoughts do you have on this?
I mean, I think to some degree you got to become a polymath. I think we've just become a culture of followers, and part of it's just because of this younger generation of those who just, we're always comparing ourselves to other people, and you just got to get out of that trap, because what you actually need to do is create and carve out your own path. I used to throw an event called Unusual Intersections, which was, oftentimes in the world of healthcare, from an innovation perspective, we looked at other healthcare companies. We looked at best practices. So what is a pharma company doing? What is the health system doing? What's this digital health company doing? Whereas I used to go and invite people from Disney or Marriott or Amex or all these other companies, said, if you ladder up the universal truth or the universal problem, we're all trying to solve for the same thing, whether it be better engagement, patient engagement. If you just take out the word patient, just put engagement. There are things, for example, that Disney can do that we can learn in the healthcare world. And the same thing applies to our lives. And I think what we need to do as individuals, if you're truly trying to branch out and make a name for yourself, you can't be looking at and copying what other people are doing, right? You have to sort of look at that combination, that intersection of things that you are great at, right? That you are great at, that you are passionate about, and that somebody's willing to pay for, right? So it's in the Japanese term, they call it ikigai. But it takes some time to figure out, like, what am I truly good at, and what do I enjoy doing, and what is adding value to society, and what are people paying for? At the very beginning of this conversation, I talked about this intersection of atoms, bits, and cells. I believe, unless somebody can prove me wrong, I think I am the only medical doctor who's also a certified interior designer and real estate professional in the entire country. I didn't predict that. I didn't plan for it. It happened that way, but that intersection gives me sort of a unique perspective and expertise that other people can't necessarily reproduce. And that, I think, is I think that's within everybody. Everybody's got sort of a unique experience, a unique story, a unique angle, a unique expertise, a unique skill set. You just need to find where that intersection plays. And then what's the story that you're trying to convey out of that? And I think that's a whole separate conversation in terms of how do I now take that and how do I brand myself so that, I like to call it sort of my own trademarks. People have their own trademarks. And these are kind of like your identifiable pieces of brand. Like if I went to you and said, well, asked you, what do you think of me? That's essentially my brand of what you think of me, right? And so my common thread was I just think differently. That was kind of like the status quo agitator. And if you look across a lot of my things, it's always just looking at things from a different perspective. But everybody's got to have sort of their own unifying story that makes them unique themselves.
Here's what I love about this. For many people, they're on a certain path and they're saying, well, what are the other paths that are out there? And they're expecting that somebody has created 3 other clear paths for them and they just need to select. And you saw a forest without paths and you said, I'm going to plow, I'm going to make my own path here, And that is an option, right? Like if you don't like the pre-made paths, you can do something as interesting, as different as what you're doing. I think that's amazing. That's an amazing.
I do think people need to earn their way, though, right? You need to understand how the system works. Like people just want to jump to, they see somebody doing a certain thing. Like I want to be that. I want to get there. Yeah. But it takes years. It takes time. You have to chip away. Like I did the ugly work, right? I learned basic management consulting. I learned strategy. I learned finding out how to crunch numbers. I learned advertising. I learned marketing. I learned communications. Like I had to put in the time to be able to deliver what I'm doing now. You just can't jump to that equation. Yeah. And once you have that foundational skill set, then the world is your oyster, right? You can sort of create and carve out, whatever you want to be.
Yeah, I think that's such another key point. And you mentioned something related earlier, which is like all of us, our careers went down before they went up, and there was a time where I was like, "What am I doing?" I'm kind of scrambling, looking around, trying to figure things out, and it was a multi-year process to eventually find the path and what gives me joy today and drives success today. And part of what we're trying to do with these stories and the resources we're providing folks is to help accelerate that kind of period that you're lost in exploring and confused.
No, that's great. If you can soften that curve, that Seth Godin calls it a dip. I don't know if you've read his book called The Dip, but he talks about you're excited about this idea, this concept, and I do this new job, I'm in this role, and then all of a sudden you're like, wait, this is not what I signed up for. Yeah. It's much harder than I expected. It's taking much longer. I've hit every obstacle and made every mistake and failure in the book. In fact, if you go to my LinkedIn page, I actually have, as a job title, I have the Museum of Unsuccesses. And I have a complete list of all my failures that I've done throughout my career.
Yes. Oh, I remember you posted that. Yes.
Yeah. And I don't call them failures because I learned something out of them, right? So I call them unsuccesses. I just wasn't successful about it. But if I were to sort of do a post-mortem on every one of them, there's something that I learned and I took away. And it was a stepping stone. I made sure not to make that same mistake on the next venture. But the simple things, for example, like when you're in that dip, right? If you're truly not passionate about something, you're going to lose interest in that dip, right? You're going to be like, it's too hard. I'm going to find something else to do. And there are certain things that I thought was a great business opportunity that I pursued, but I was like, I can't stick it through this dip. Like I just don't have it in me. And so that was one of the failure items. Another one was consistency. Sometimes people just don't understand how long it takes, right? So, for me, when I started the Well Home, I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to have, it's going to be up and running. We're going to be set within, 3 to 6 months. No, I'm 2 years in and we're still sort of on that uphill battle. Now we're starting to see the flywheel take place. But I could have easily just, 12, 18 months ago, just given up and be like, no. But now it's a whole movement that's actually is a tailwind that's coming behind and lifting up this entire industry. So now we're starting to see a lot of traction, but it's taken a lot of time. So there's all sorts of layers and obstacles and layers of friction in that dip that I'm hoping through, what you're sharing with everyone through the Academy, that they'll have an understanding of what happens in that dip. And if you recognize it and you're aware of it, then you're more likely to come out of it on top.
I think the piece that resonates with me is the hard work. We've all done hard work to get through medical school and residency and pass our boards and so on. And then we forget that somebody else who's successful in some other non-clinical domain didn't get there by accident, right? If someone has, I don't know, 30,000 followers on LinkedIn, well, they were adding people one at a time, over a period of time, over a decade, and so on. If someone is giving really amazing speeches on stage, well, they've given 40 speeches that were suboptimal to get to a place, right? Like, how do you think about, or how do we advise our junior teammates who have a good income right now, right? So one of the first few people who signed up for our course were specialists. I'm sure they, their base pay is sometimes more than mine, right? How do we guide them in, there's this transition period, dip period, whatever we want to call it, where income will come down before it goes back up. And they're so, even though they have a ton of savings, a lot of my friends are so worried, so stressed that what's going to happen if in 2 months I have less income than before? But they really want this future state. Like, how do you guide them through that?
That's a tricky question. It just depends on where people are in their stage of life. Like if you're partner, pre-kids or anything like that, then I would say, take your risk at that time. We always say there's we think that there's going to be some better time in the future. It never comes, right? So there's never a good time to make such drastic change. What you do want to do though, is you want to try to de-risk as much as possible. And so there are ways, people like to say like entrepreneurs are super risky. In fact, they're not risky at all. What they do is they do their homework. And if they truly understand how entrepreneurship works, is they know who their market is, they're running focus groups, they're running tests, they're doing, minimal viable products and prototyping before it's out there. They're making sure, it may take them longer to get what they have to do, but they're making sure that once they are in market, they've de-risked everything that they can possibly de-risk. And so I think just individuals need to look at whatever they're trying to pursue. How do I de-risk this as much as possible? If I'm trying to jump into, a pharmaceutical role, or if I'm trying to create my own company, or I'm trying to, take on a chief medical officer role at some digital health company, I think you just need to, find the things that ultimately you would identify as risks in there. And whether it could be family, it could be savings account, it could be not having the right skill set, it could be entering the wrong market, it could be with the wrong people. All those things are risk factors. And you don't know what you're at risk. You don't know what you don't know. So back to your original conversation, Reza, you have to have that network. You have to have that group. You have to have that resource where you can ask these questions, because you're not going to know what you don't know. So try to identify what those risks are and then de-risk them over the way. So when I branched out on my own, I actually used to do, and I shared this with a lot of folks, I did a 2x2 table. And what it was is on one axis, I had short-term versus long-term, meaning in terms of what service I'm providing. And on the other axis, I had variable versus fixed. And what I try to do oftentimes when you're branching out is we sort of over-index on one category. So what you want is revenue coming in that's like, for example, variable and short-term was like my speaking engagements, right? Fixed and long-term was my retainer consulting contracts. Variable and long-term were my entrepreneurial endeavors that I didn't know how it was going to turn out, but I was having some income coming here and there. So what you want to try to do is, if you just look at that simple financial matrix, make sure that you've got something in every one of those boxes. And that's kind of how you can hedge your risk in terms of the financial downside. And if one goes astray, at least you've got backup in the other three categories. Because there's so many people that I encounter that put all their eggs in one basket. And when something went wrong, they were like, I'm just going to default back and go back to practicing medicine because it was just too risky and too scary at that time. But if you've got a nice hedge and de-risking it, you can play it pretty safe.
So Gautam, tell me a little bit about what's your learning process like how are you continuing to grow from an intellectual perspective? And then how are you increasing your personal opportunities for like business growth, business development, and like just like new opportunities?
Yeah, we don't have a scarcity in knowledge. We have a scarcity in the desire for knowledge, right? So it's like people, I mean, here's a funny thing. I just saw a recent post. There was at one point, remember when everything came on the internet and there were all these courses online and so forth, and Harvard and MIT decided to make every one of their courses for free online. Now think about it. You can get a Harvard education or an MIT education for free because they put it online, and nobody consumed it.
Yeah.
Right. So, and we're now back to, their classes online, and people want the prestige from the university. They don't want to actually put in the work. I think learning is probably one of the most underrated things that's out there. I think the thing that separates the people who succeed from those who don't are those who are sort of voracious learners. And you can really learn in so many different ways. I never stop learning. Like for me, it's just sort of built into how I structure everything I do. Like speaking for me, yes, I enjoy it, but I also learn. Right? Yeah. When you're on stage and you're in the green room and you're sharing the stage with people like Mark Cuban or Seth Godin or Beth Comstock or all these great people, like you're learning from them as well in the process as much as you're sharing out. So even whenever I deliver a talk, I make it a point to try to learn from my audience as well. Listen to them, hear what they're having to say. It's sort of a two-way street. I've also, true to the things that we recommend in the Well Home, I design ways to learn in my daily environment. So for example, when I go for a run, I hate running, but one, it gets me to exercise and I get my fitness and my fitness goals in. But what I do is I listen to a podcast. I love podcasts. And so I'll listen to a podcast only when I'm running. So that's my reward and my incentive to go out and run, but it's my way of learning. And what I do is I go mid-podcast to mid-podcast. That way I want to, you come back and you're like, oh, I want to finish the episode. So you come back.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Right? Simple little habit stacking to change your behaviors can actually make it. So I layer in learning stuff throughout my entire day. Like I'm probably not one for someone to emulate. Like I'm obsessed with trying to consume information. So, for me, even like during COVID, I got my certification in interior design because I was, I probably could have gone and so I was going to study it on my own anyways, but I wanted to know how the industry worked on the inside. And so I'm the type of person that if I'm going to involve myself with something, I want to learn how to do it first. I may not be perfect at it, but at least I have an understanding of it.
Amazing. So let's wrap this up. So Gautam, where can people find you online?
LinkedIn's probably where I'm most active, Dr. Gautam Gulati. A lot of my outlinks go from there. You can also go to thewellhome.co to see what I'm working on the Well Home. If you want to see some of my speaking stuff, you can either go there when it's longevity focused or I talk about innovation at iamdrg.com. And also Dr. Gautam Gulati on Instagram.
Amazing. Dr. Gautam, Dr. G. Gulati, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
This has been fun. Yeah, thank you.